An innocent young woman faced certain death in the wasteland until a wounded native warrior changed her destiny forever. Rosemary collapsed against the scorching sand, her ripped garments clinging to her shaking form like burial cloth. The binding marks around her arms had become scarlet, and her mouth was already splitting from dehydration. She had remained there since sunrise, deserted by those who swore to safeguard her. For hours before, she had placed faith in the wrong person. Thomas Blackwood had promised to assist her in fleeing the unwanted marriage her caretaker had orchestrated. He'd guaranteed safe travel to the neighboring settlement, an opportunity for liberation. Yet when they arrived at the wasteland's border, everything transformed. Thomas's kind expression became as harsh as granite when she rejected his unwelcome advances. "You believe you're superior to me?" he'd growled, seizing her arms with hands. "Like steel. We'll discover how arrogant you remain when the heat finds you." He secured her to a withered cottonwood and departed. Abandoning her with only the blazing sun and her terror, Rose had cried out until her voice disappeared. She had struggled against the bindings until her arms bled. Now, she could merely await death's arrival. The wasteland extended infinitely in all directions. Waves of heat danced over the barren terrain like spirits, taunting her despair. Carrion birds circled above, patient and aware. Rose shut her eyes in attempted prayer. Yet even faith seemed to dissipate in this forsaken location. But Rose remained, unaware that barely a mile distant, another soul battled for survival. Someone who would alter everything. Taco, battle leader of the canyon Apache, held his palm against the arrow injury in his shoulder. Blood leaked through his fingers as he directed his mount toward the water source he knew lay concealed among the stones. The ambush had occurred at daybreak. Soldiers from the outpost had broken the peace agreement once more, striking his hunting. Grouped without provocation, 3 of his fighters were deceased. 2 others bore wounds. Now Takoda rode alone, his sight blurring from blood loss, desperate to find safety. His horse stumbled, nearly casting him from the saddle. The creature was as weary as he, foam collecting at its lips. They wouldn't travel much further without water. Taco squinted through the heat mirage, seeking the familiar rock shapes that indicated the spring. That's when he spotted her, a figure in pale cloth, motionless against a dead tree. Initially, he assumed it was a mirage. The desert played vicious tricks on dying men, but as he approached, he could observe the rise and fall of breathing. Someone lived out there. Every instinct commanded him to continue riding. His tribe and the white settlers were adversaries. This might be a trap. His wound was severe and he needed to reach his village before infection took hold. Yet something caused him to halt his horse. The young woman appeared no older than 18. Her auburn hair was matted with perspiration and sand.
The ropes
around her arms told a tale of betrayal that Takoda understood well. He'd witnessed his own people abandoned to perish by those they trusted. Rose's eyes opened as a shadow fell across her face. She expected vultures, but instead found herself gazing up at a man unlike any she'd encountered. His skin was copper from years under the sun, his ebony hair flowing loose around a face marked by both wisdom and suffering. Blood stained his leather shirt, and his dark eyes held a depth that made her forget to breathe. For a moment, neither moved. The Apache leader and the abandoned girl examined each other across a chasm of fear and mistrust. Rose had heard tales about his people's stories of violence and brutality that white mothers used to frighten their children. But the man looking down at her didn't match those stories. Takoda saw something in her eyes that surprised him. It's not hatred or terror, but recognition of shared anguish. This girl understood what it meant to be betrayed, to be left broken by those who should have protected her. He could ride away, should ride away. His own survival depended on reaching his village. But as Rose's cracked lips tried to form words, as her eyes pleaded for mercy she had no right to expect, Tokode made a choice that would bind their destinies together. He dismounted slowly, his wound screaming in protest. Rose watched in stunned silence as the Apache leader knelt beside her and began working at the knots around her arms. His touch was gentle, careful not to cause more pain to her raw skin. But what neither of them knew was that Thomas Blackwood hadn't ridden as far as they thought. And when he saw the Apache leader freeing his discarded prize, everything was about to become much more dangerous. The ropes fell away from Rose's arms, but her relief was brief. Takada's head snapped up, his warrior instinct sensing danger before his ears caught the sound. Hoofbeats coming fast from the direction of town. "Can you stand?" His English was clear but accented, each word carefully chosen. Rose tried to rise, but her legs buckled. Hours in the desert heat had drained what little strength she possessed. Without hesitation, Takada lifted her into his arms. The movement sent fire through his wounded shoulder, but he gritted his teeth and carried her toward his horse. Rose felt the strength in his arms, the steady rhythm of his breathing, and something inside her that had been broken began to heal. Three riders. Takada muttered, scanning the horizon. "They see us?" Rose's blood turned to ice. She knew who was coming. Thomas hadn't been content to let the desert claim her. He'd returned with help, probably telling the others that she'd been taken by hostiles. It would be his word against theirs. And no one would believe an Apache leader over a white man. "We'll kill you," she whispered. "Thomas told them I was kidnapped. They won't listen to the truth." Takada's jaw tightened. He'd survived 38 years by reading danger in men's faces, and he could see the hunger for violence in these approaching riders. They wanted Apache blood, and any excuse would suffice. His horse was exhausted, he was wounded, and the girl could barely stand. Running wasn't an option. Fighting three armed men in his condition would be suicide. But surrender meant death for both of them. "What's your name?" he asked as he helped Rose onto his horse. "Rosemary," she managed, her voice hoarse from thirst. "Rosemary," he repeated, as if testing how the words felt. "I am Takada. If we die, today at least, we won't die as strangers." The riders were close enough now that Rose could make out Thomas's face beneath his hat brim. He was smiling, and that smile made her stomach turn. Beside him rode two men she recognized from town, Jake Morrison and Bull Henderson. Both known for their hatred of the Apache and their quick trigger fingers, Thomas raised his hand, signaling the others to slow down. They formed a semicircle around Takada and Rose, their weapons drawn but not yet aimed. The game hadn't started yet, but everyone knew the rules. "Well," Thomas called out, his voice carrying clearly in the desert air. "Looks like we found ourselves an Indian trying to steal white women. That's a hanging offense where I come." From Takada said nothing. He kept his hands visible, away from the knife at his belt. Rose felt his tension, the coiled energy of a predator forced to play prey. "She ain't stolen," Jake spat, tobacco juice staining his beard. "Look at her, all torn up and scared. Apache probably had his way with her already." Rose's face burned. With shame and rage, "That's not true. He saved me."
"Thomas, tell them what you did."
Thomas's laugh was cold as winter wind. "Poor thing's been in the sun too long, talking nonsense. Everyone knows you can't trust what a woman says when she's been through trauma like this." Bull nodded gravely. "Terrible thing with these savages. Do to Christian women. Let's put her out of her misery. Probably be a mercy." The words hit Rose like physical blows. They weren't just planning to kill Takada. They were going to murder her too and claim it was justice. She could see it in their eyes, the way they looked at her now, like she was already dead, already stained beyond saving.
"You're lying,"
she said, but her voice carried no strength. Who would believe her? A poor orphan girl with no family, no protection, no value to anyone. Takada shifted slightly, positioning himself between Rose and the guns. She felt his hand brush against hers, warm and steady. In that touch, she found something she'd never had before, someone willing to die for her. "The girl speaks truth," Takada said quietly. "I found her tied to the tree. She was left to die." Thomas's face darkened. "You calling me a liar, Chief? I call you what you are." The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Rose could hear her heart pounding, could smell the sweat and leather and metallic scent of weapons ready to kill. 3 men against 1 wounded Apache and a helpless girl. The odds couldn't be worse. But Thomas wasn't satisfied with simple murder. He wanted to play with his prey first. "Tell you what, Chief," he said, dismounting slowly. "You let the girl go right out of here peaceful like, and maybe we let you live. She comes with us. We take her back to town, where she belongs. Everyone wins." Rose felt Tekeda's muscles tense. They both knew what taking her back to town really meant. Thomas would claim she'd been rescued, traumatized, in need of his protection. And with no family to object, no one to speak for her, she'd disappear into whatever hell he had planned. "The girl stays with me," Takeda said. Thomas's smile widened. "Now that's interesting. Apache chief getting attached to white girls makes a man wonder what other crimes you've been up to." Jake and Bull spread out wider, closing off any escape route. Their horses snorted and pawed the ground, sensing the violence that was coming. Rose realized with crystal clarity that she was about to watch the only person who'd ever tried to save her die because of her. The thought was unbearable. She opened her mouth to tell Takeda to leave her, to save himself while he could. But before she could speak, something unexpected happened. Something that would change everything once again. A rifle shot cracked across the desert, but it didn't come from Thomas or his men. The bullet struck the sand between the horses, sending them dancing sideways in panic. Everyone spun toward the sound, weapons swinging wildly as they searched for the shooter. On a ridge 50 yards away, a figure stood silhouetted against the burning sky. Even at this distance, Rose could see the glint of a rifle barrel and the distinctive outline of an Apache warrior. Takeda's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Ayana," he called out in his native tongue. "Sister." The voice that answered was strong and carried the authority of command. "Takeda, are you harmed?" Thomas's face went white as he realized their situation had just become impossible. One wounded, Apache, was manageable. But if there were more warriors on the ridge, if this was a war party, ... double quotes, how many? Bull whispered, his gun hand shaking. Takeda spoke again in Apache, his words flowing like water over stone. Rose couldn't understand the language, but she could hear the steel beneath the calm tones. This wasn't a conversation. It was a negotiation for their lives. The warrior on the ridge responded. Rose caught something that sounded like questioning. Takeda glanced down at her, then spoke again, his voice carrying a note of finality. "What's he saying?" Jake demanded. Sweat beading on his forehead despite the heat, Takeda's dark eyes fixed on Thomas. "I told my sister that these men left a young woman to die in the desert. I told her that one of them tried to force himself on her when she refused his advances." Hand moved toward his gun. "That's a damn lie." "I told her," Takeda continued, his voice never rising, "that this man tied her to a tree and left her for the vultures because she would not submit to his desires." The warrior on the ridge spoke again, and this time Rose could hear the anger. In her voice, even without understanding the words, Thomas had gone gray, finally grasping the full horror of his position. "And what did your sister say to that?" Rose asked softly. Takeda's smile was sharp as a blade. "She said that among my people, men who abuse women in such ways are not considered men at all. They're considered animals, and animals are hunted." The rifle on the ridge swung toward Thomas. Bull and Jake began backing their horses away, clearly, deciding that their loyalty to Thomas had limits. "Now wait just a minute," Thomas sputtered. "You can't believe the word of some hysterical girl over the word of a man who left her tied to die," Takeda interrupted. "Rosemary, show them your arms." Rose raised her hands, displaying the raw rope burns that circled her arms like bloody bracelets. The evidence was undeniable, written in her own blood and pain. "Those could have come from anywhere," Thomas said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Remove your shawl," Takeda ordered Rose gently. Rose's eyes widened in shock. I couldn't." Me, with trembling fingers, Rose pulled aside the torn fabric of her dress, revealing her shoulders and back. Thomas's handiwork was clearly visible, finger-shaped bruises where he'd grabbed her, scratches from when she'd fought him off. Jake cursed under his breath. Bull spat in the sand and shook his head. Even they had limits, and Thomas had clearly crossed them. "Jesus, Tom," Jake muttered. "What the hell did you do?" Thomas's composure finally cracked. "She's nothing, a nobody. An orphan with no family, no protection. It's going to miss her." The words hung in the desert air, like a confession. Rose felt tears burning her eyes, not from pain but from rage. He'd just confirmed everything Tokoda had said, validated every accusation. But Thomas wasn't finished digging his own grave. Besides, he continued, desperation making him reckless. What's one less mouth to feed? The girl's been nothing but trouble since her parents died. At least this way she'd have been useful for something. The rifle shot from the ridge came so close to Thomas's head that it singed the hair beneath his hat brim. His horse reared, nearly throwing him from the saddle. Next shot won't miss, Tokoda called out in English, his voice carrying to the ridge. Thomas was trapped, and he knew it. But cornered animals were often the most dangerous. Thomas's hand moved to his gun with the desperate speed of a man with nothing left to lose. If I'm going down, I'm taking her with me. The pistol cleared his holster. Swinging toward Rose, time seemed to slow as she stared down the black barrel of death. She could see Thomas's finger tightening on the trigger, could see the madness in his eyes, but Tokoda was faster. Despite his wound, despite the exhaustion, the Apache leader moved with the fluid grace of a born warrior. His knife left its sheath. In a silver arc, spinning end over end through the scorching air, the blade struck Thomas's wrist with surgical precision. His scream echoed across the desert as the gun tumbled from nerveless fingers, discharging harmlessly into the sand. Blood poured from the wound as he clutched his injured hand to his chest. My wrist, he cut clean through my wrist. Sat frozen in their saddles, finally understanding that they were completely outmatched. This wasn't just a wounded Apache. This was a war chief, a man who'd survived countless battles through skill and instinct. Rose's voice cut through Thomas's. Screams like thunder. I want him to know what it feels like. Tokoda looked at her with new respect. The broken girl who'd been tied to a tree was gone. In her place sat someone harder, someone who'd found strength in the depths of betrayal. What are you talking about? Thomas gasped, still bleeding. Rose slid down from Tokoda's horse, her legs steadier now. You left me to die alone. You wanted me to know fear, to know helplessness. Now it's your turn. Rosemary Tokoda said quietly, what do you ask of me? Tie him to that tree the same way he tied me. Let him feel the sun. Let him know thirst. Let him understand what he tried to do to me. Jake and Bull exchanged glances. This wasn't what they'd signed up for. They'd come expecting a simple rescue, maybe some Apache killing. They hadn't counted on witnessing Thomas's crimes, hadn't expected to feel sick about their own participation. Now hold on, Bull said. Can't just leave a white man tied up. For the vultures, why not? Rose's voice was steady as stone. He left a white woman tied up for them. What makes his life worth more than mine? The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything they'd been taught about the value of human life. Thomas was white, male property, owning. By every measure their society used, he should matter more than an orphan girl. But looking at Rose's rope-burned arms, at the bruises on her shoulders, those measures felt hollow. Tokoda spoke to his sister on the ridge. The warrior responded, and Tokoda nodded. Ayana says 3 more of our people come. They will be here. Soon, you have until then to decide what justice looks like. Thomas's face went ashen. You can't do this. I have rights. I'm a citizen. I own land. You have what you gave me, Rose interrupted. Nothing. The truth of it hit Thomas like a physical blow. Everything he'd said about her applied to him now. He was alone, unprotected, at the mercy of people he'd wronged.
For the first time in his life, Thomas Blackwood understood what it
Meant to be powerless. Please, he whispered. I'll make it right. I'll tell everyone what really happened. I'll confess to the sheriff. I'll what? Rose's laugh was bitter. You'll tell them you tried to rape an orphan and left her to die when she fought back. You think they'll punish you for that? Think anyone will care about justice for someone like me? Thomas opened his mouth, then closed it. They both knew she was right. In a world where women like Rose had no value, men like Thomas faced no consequences. But this wasn't that world anymore. This was the desert, where different laws applied, where an Apache chief could be judge and jury, where a broken girl could demand her own justice. Jake finally found his voice. What do you want from us? Rose looked at the 2 men who'd ridden. Out expecting to be heroes. I want you to ride back to town. I want you to tell them exactly what you saw here. Tell them Thomas Blackwood confessed to attacking me. No. Tell them he tried to kill me when I refused him. And then what? Bull asked. Then you forget you ever saw me alive. The implications hit them both at once. Rose wasn't just demanding justice for Thomas's crimes. She was planning to disappear entirely, to walk away from a world that had never wanted her anyway. But as the sound of approaching hoofbeats grew louder, as more Apache warriors appeared on the horizon, Rose realized that her plan might be more complicated than she'd thought, because Dakota was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, and something in his eyes suggested that her story was far from over. 3 Apache warriors crested the ridge, their horses moving like shadows across the burning landscape. Rose watched them approach, her heart hammering against her ribs. These weren't the savage monsters from the stories white mothers told their children. These were men of dignity and purpose, their faces marked by the same quiet strength she'd seen in Tokata. The lead warrior spoke rapidly to Takata in their native tongue. Rose caught the questioning tone, the concern for their chief's wound. Dakota responded, gesturing toward Thomas, then toward Rose. The warrior's eyes hardened as they took in her. Injuries, the rope burns, the obvious signs of violence. What are they saying? Jake whispered, his voice tight with fear. They're deciding whether you live or die, Tokata said simply. Bull's horse pranced nervously beneath him. We didn't do nothing to the girl. That was all Thomas. You rode with him. He came here to kill me for saving her. In their eyes, you share his guilt. Rose felt the weight of their stares, the desperate hope in Jake and Bull's faces. Men had been ready to murder her an hour ago, had called her worthless, contaminated. Now they begged for mercy from the very people they'd been taught to despise. The lead warrior dismounted and approached Thomas, who was still clutching his wounded wrist. Blood had soaked through his shirt, and his face was gray with pain and terror. The Apache studied him with the same expression a hunter might use to examine a wounded animal. Nolish asks, what punishment fits this crime, Tokota translated. Among our people, men who abuse women are made to feel the same helplessness they inflicted. Thomas's voice cracked. I'll do anything. I'll give you money, horses, whatever you want. What I want, Rose said, stepping forward, is for you too. Understand that I'm not nothing, that I matter, that what you did to me was wrong. Thomas looked up at Hurley, looked perhaps for the first time since they'd met. He saw the strength in her bearing, the fire in her eyes that hours of torture hadn't extinguished. For a moment, something that might have been shame flickered across his features. I didn't think you didn't think I was human, Rose finished. You saw something you could use and throw away. But I'm still here, still breathing, still worth something. The Apache warriors spoke among themselves, their voices low and serious. Rose couldn't understand the words, but she could feel the weight of judgment in their tone. These men had seen enough injustice to recognize it when they found it. Tokata swayed slightly in his saddle, and Rose realized his wound was worse than she'd thought. Dark blood had soaked through the crude bandage, and his breathing was becoming labored. He needed medical attention, needed to reach his village before infection set in. You're hurt, she said, moving to his side. You should go. Let me deal with Thomas. Tokota looked down at her, and in his eyes, she saw something that made her breath catch. Respect, admiration, and something deeper, more dangerous. Something that suggested he wasn't planning to leave her behind. You would come with us? He asked quietly. The question hung in the desert air like a challenge to everything Rose had ever known. Leave the white world that had never wanted her. Join a people she'd been taught to fear. Trade one uncertain future for another. But before she could answer, Nolnish spoke sharply, pointing toward the horizon. More riders were coming from the direction of town. A lot more. Soldiers, Tokata breathed. Thomas's bloody face split into a triumphant grin. I told the sheriff where I was going. Told him I might need backup if there was trouble with hostiles. Trap was closing. In minutes, they'd be surrounded by cavalry, outnumbered and outgunned. Rose looked at Tokata, at the warriors who'd risked their lives to save a white girl they didn't know. She thought about the choice before her, about the two worlds pulling her in different directions. And then she made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. Rose grabbed Thomas's fallen pistol from the sand, checking the chambers with steady hands. 4 bullets left. She'd watched her father clean his weapons enough times to know how they worked. "What are you doing?" Sokota asked, but there was understanding in his voice. "Buying you time to escape." Rose's voice was calm, resolved. "When those soldiers arrive, they'll find me holding Thomas at gunpoint. I'll tell them he attacked me, that I got away and captured him myself." "They'll never believe you overpowered him alone," Bull protested. Rose smiled grimly. "They'll believe what they want to believe. A white girl heroically defending herself sounds better than an Apache war chief saving her from white men." Thomas's eyes widened with panic. "You can't. I'll tell them the truth, will you?" Rose pressed the gun barrel against his temple. "You'll confess to attempted rape, to leaving me tied up to die? You think that makes you look better?" The approaching hoofbeats were getting louder. Rose could see dust clouds rising from multiple horses, at least a dozen riders. The cavalry was coming in force, expecting a fight. Takota struggled to dismount, his wound bleeding freely. "No, I will not leave you to face this alone." "Yes, you will." Rose's voice carried the authority of someone who'd finally found her purpose. "Because if you stay, we all die. If you go, at least some of us live." Nolnish spoke urgently to Takota, gesturing toward the approaching soldiers. The other warriors were already preparing to retreat, their horses dancing with nervous energy. "Rosemary," Takota said quietly, "there is something you should know." "What?" "In my language, your name means morning star in the darkness. It means hope when there should be none." The words hit her like a physical blow. She'd spent her entire life believing she was worthless, unwanted, nothing. But this man, this Apache chief who barely knew her, saw her as hope itself. "I can't go with you," she whispered. "I don't belong in your world any more than I belonged in theirs. You belong wherever you choose to belong." The soldiers were close, now their voices carrying across the desert. Rose could hear their sergeant calling out orders, positioning his men for whatever they might find. "Go!" she ordered. "All of you, now." Jake and Bull didn't need to be told twice. They spurred their horses toward town, racing to put distance between themselves and the coming confrontation. But Takota remained, his dark eyes fixed on Rose's face. "When this is over," he said, "when you have dealt with the white man's justice, you will always have a place with my people. Always. How can you say that? You don't even know me. I know that you chose to save my life when you could have. Saved yourself. I know that you faced 3 armed men without flinching. I know that you demand justice instead of revenge." Takota's voice was growing weaker, but his words carried absolute conviction. "These things tell me who you are." The first soldiers appeared on the ridge, their blue uniforms stark against the red stone. Rose raised the pistol, making sure they could see her holding Thomas at gunpoint. "Go!" she shouted. Finally, reluctantly, Takota allowed Nolish to help him onto his horse. The Apache warriors melted into the landscape like smoke, disappearing among the rocks and shadows. With the skill of men born to this harsh land, Rose was alone again. But this time, it felt different. This time she'd chosen her solitude. "Help." She called out to the approaching soldiers. "This man attacked me. I've got him." Sergeant Patterson was the first to reach them, his weathered face grim with suspicion. Behind him rode a dozen cavalry troopers, their carbines ready for trouble. "Miss, are you all right?" Rose let tears flow down her cheeks, not entirely forced. "He tied me up, left me to die. I managed to get free when he came back, got his gun away from him." Thomas tried to speak, but Rose pressed the pistol harder against his skull. "One word and I'll show them what you tried to do to me." The sergeant dismounted, approaching carefully. "Let me take the weapon, miss. You're safe now," Rose handed. Over the gun, watching as 2 soldiers grabbed Thomas and bound his hands. He was saying something about Apache, about being attacked, but his story made no sense. A wounded man babbling about savages while a young woman stood over him with his own weapon. "What's your name, miss?" Patterson asked gently. Rosebell, I have no family, no guardian. This man offered to help me find work in the next town, but when we got to the desert, she let her voice trail off, indicating the rope burns on her arms. Patterson's face darkened as he examined her injuries. Son of a pardon my language, miss. Will he hang for this? If there's any justice in this world, he will. But Rose had learned something important in the desert heat. Justice wasn't something that happened to you. It was something you made for yourself, by the choices you made and the strength you found in the darkest moments. As the soldiers prepared to ride back to town, Rose looked toward the rocks where Tokaday had disappeared. Somewhere out there, wounded Apache chief was riding toward his village, carrying her memory with him. And somehow, she knew their paths would cross again. The trial lasted 3 days. Rose sat in the front row of the makeshift courthouse, watching Thomas's lawyer try to paint her as a confused, traumatized girl who couldn't remember events clearly. But the rope burns on her arms told a story no amount of legal maneuvering could erase. Jake and Bull testified reluctantly, admitting they'd found Thomas with a knife wound and Rose holding his gun. They spoke carefully, editing out any mention of Apache warriors, but their discomfort was obvious. Men who'd ridden out expecting to be heroes had returned as witnesses to a crime that sickened them. Judge Harrison was a hard man who'd seen enough frontier justice to recognize truth when he heard it. Thomas's claims about being attacked by hostiles fell apart under questioning. Why would Apache warriors leave him alive? Why would they give a white woman his own gun? Why were there no other wounds except the precisely placed cut on his wrist? The evidence suggests, Judge Harrison declared, that Miss Rose defended herself against an attempted assault. Mr. Blackwood, you are hereby sentenced to hang by the neck until dead. Thomas screamed as they dragged him away, still claiming innocence, still insisting that savage Indians had attacked him, but his words fell on deaf ears. The town had heard enough lies from Thomas Blackwood. Rose felt no satisfaction in his sentence. Justice had been served, but it felt hollow somehow. Thomas would die, but that wouldn't undo what he'd tried to do to her. It wouldn't erase the hours she'd spent tied to that tree. Certain she would die alone and forgotten. After the trial, people treated her differently. Some with pity, some with respect she'd never experienced before. The hotel owner offered her a job as a cook. The dressmaker said she needed an assistant. For the first time in her life, Rose had options. But as the days passed, she found herself walking to the edge of town, staring out at the desert where everything had changed. The other townspeople thought she was traumatized, that she was reliving her ordeal. They didn't understand that she was listening for something they couldn't hear. 2 weeks after the trial, she heard it. Hoofbeats in the night, moving slowly, carefully. Rose slipped out of the hotel and made her way to the desert's edge, her heart racing with anticipation and fear. Dakota sat on his horse in the moonlight, his wound healed enough for travel. He looked healthier, stronger, but his eyes held the same intensity that had captured her from the first moment. You came back, she whispered. I said you would always have a place with my people. I meant it. Rose looked back at the town where she'd finally found acceptance, then at the Apache chief who'd risked everything to save her. 2 worlds, 2 futures, pulling her in different directions. If I come with you, there's no going back. Your people and mine will always be enemies. Not always, Tokuda said quietly. Perhaps someday, when others see what I see in you, they will understand that strength has no color, that courage belongs to anyone brave enough to claim it. Rose thought about the girl who'd been tied to a tree, waiting to die. That girl was gone, burned away by desert heat and forged into something harder, something unbreakable. She thought about the choice before her, safety and acceptance in a world that had never valued her, or uncertainty and adventure with people who saw her worth. She thought about what Tokuda had told her. You belong wherever you choose to belong. Will you teach me your language? She asked. His smile was answer enough. Rose walked forward, accepting the hand he offered, letting him pull her up onto his horse. Behind them, the town slept peacefully, never knowing that one of their own was riding away into legend. But as they disappeared into the desert night, neither Rose nor Dakota noticed the figure watching from the shadows. Someone who would make sure their story didn't end with a simple escape into the wilderness. 6 months later, Rose had become someone entirely new. Her skin was bronze from desert sun, her hands strong from learning Apache ways. She could track game, read weather and cloud formations, and speak Dakota's language with growing fluency. The Apache women had accepted her slowly, testing her resolve, but they'd eventually embraced her as one of their own. She and Dakota had married according to Apache custom, their union blessed by elders who saw how they strengthened each other. Rose had found not just love, but purpose. She helped negotiate with white traders, her unique position allowing her to bridge to worlds that desperately needed understanding. But the past had a way of finding you, even in the most remote places. Jake Morrison rode into the Apache camp under a white flag, his face haggard with exhaustion and fear. Rose recognized him immediately, though she'd hoped never to see any reminder of her old life again. "I mean, Rose," he stammered, dismounting. "Carefully, I need to talk to you, both of you." Dakota emerged from their dwelling, his hand resting on his knife handle. "You are not welcome here, white man. Please, it's about Thomas." Rose felt ice form in her stomach. "Thomas is dead, yet we watched them hang him." Jake shook his head grimly. That's what they wanted everyone to think. But Thomas had friends, people, with money and influence. They broke him out the night before the execution, made it look like he'd escaped and been shot trying to flee. But he's alive, and he's gathering men. What kind of men? "Attack!"